Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to invite you to join me on the next show, Legal Lines, where we are very pleased to have on the show the Chief Justice of the Louisiana Supreme Court, Kitty Kimball. The Chief Justice is going to talk to us about, frankly, some very personal things that have happened to her. She had a stroke in January of 2010, and she's going to talk about the symptoms that she experienced, but she's also going to talk to us about what she was doing prior to that. She's also going to talk to us about life after the stroke and the fact that she is still the Chief Justice of the Louisiana Supreme Court. So join us on the next Legal Lines with Chief Justice Kitty Kimball. Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to thank you on behalf of myself, Sean Fagan, and Corey Ogeron, and our entire staff for letting us come into your homes for the last 10 years via Legal Lines. We hope that you've come to a greater understanding of how the law works and how the government works for you. So from all of us, thank you. Welcome to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith, and I am very pleased to have on the show today the Chief Justice of the Louisiana Supreme Court, Chief Justice Kitty Kimball. Chief Justice, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
I can't believe it's been, I think, since Gustav, the last time we did this, and we picked a building that still had a roof on it and some electricity. But a lot has happened.
Oh, most definitely.
Before we dive into what has gone on in those subsequent years, just give the folks a little bit of background about you, because you are a very unique, special person. You've broken every female ceiling that there is in the judiciary, because almost first lady lawyer, but first lady judge, first female justice, and then of course the first female Chief Justice of the Louisiana Supreme Court. Tell the folks, kind of fill in the gaps.
I graduated from law school in 1970, and at that time there were very few female lawyers, and I clerked for a federal judge, and then I worked in the Attorney General's office, and we decided that it was time for me to be a real lawyer and practice. And so I opened a practice in New Roads, where we lived, and really was the first female lawyer in that judicial district that I'm aware of. There may have been one that I'm not aware of, but it was quite interesting, you know, because you know, people just didn't expect to see women around the courtroom.
Well, you were telling a great story about when you went in and
oh yeah, I remember very well. There was an elderly gentleman in Port Allen that had been scammed by some traveling salesman who had gotten him to sign his X. He could not read and write. And next thing you know, he was being sued for $300 for pots that he had bought. In the 70s? In the 70s. And bless his heart, he said, you know, we wouldn't have been able to use those pots if I would have bought them. I never said I was going to buy those pots. So I went to court to represent him, pro bono, of course.
Meaning free? Free,
yeah. His name was Ham. I remember that. His first name was Ham. And I remember his last name, but I don't know that, you know, we don't want to mention it. But and I remember going in the courtroom, and it was just you know, a very small little thing, and I turned around and the courtroom was full, entirely full. I mean, I think every deputy in the parish was there, just because they had never seen a woman in their courtroom before. It was, you know, quite interesting, because we won the case, thank God.
We've come a long way since then.
Oh, have we ever, yes. And of course there were no female judges. When I was elected district judge in '82, I believe.
And you were a trial judge for what, about 10 years? For 10 years,
yeah. And at that time, I think I was the 5th judge at that level, at the district level, that was a female in the whole state. So that was quite interesting.
Groundbreaking also.
Yeah,
but I enjoyed it. For the folks to understand, the trial judge is the one that's on the front lines. They have the folks coming in and presenting testimony and dealing with civil cases and criminal cases, and you just kind of like the frontline soldier.
That's right, and in our jurisdiction, we did everything. I mean, we did criminal, we did civil, we did juvenile, we did family, we did everything. Some of the courts, like in Baton Rouge, have separated their court system so that certain judges only do certain kinds of work, but we didn't have that on my side of the river. Every judge did every kind of work.
So you had to know pretty much everything.
know a little bit about everything. It always was amazing to me because it seemed sometimes that the public thought that somehow you just, I don't know, by osmosis, you knew everything just because you won an election, which I always thought was such a strange thing. But in some ways, it was as though you were expected to know everything about everything. Obviously, you couldn't and you didn't, but you know, sometimes
try and educate yourself fast, huh?
Yeah, you definitely had to stay up on what was going on in a lot of different areas.
And of course, for the folks, part of the role of their lawyer is to educate the court.
Correct.
At least as far as their position is on the particular issue in front of the judge. But the judge at the trial level is deciding.
That's right.
What's right and what's wrong.
That's right. And we give tremendous deference throughout the system, even through the appeals. The courts below us, and we insist at our level that the trial judges are supposed to be given great deference because, as you say, they are the ones who see the people, who hear the people, who make judgments on who's telling the truth and who's not. You can't make those judgments from looking at a piece of paper like you get in an appellate court.
Right.
So,
and I don't think folks really understand always that an appellate court, and of course the Louisiana Supreme Court, they don't hear witnesses, they don't hear testimony, they receive basically a book to read and documents or maybe photographs to look at and make their decision. There's nothing like what takes place at the trial level.
Not at all, which is of course the reason that we give such great deference to the findings on the factual issues of the trial courts, because they are the ones that look. I mean, you can sit and talk to someone or hear someone talk and have a much better understanding of whether or not they're telling the truth than you can when you try to read their testimony.
That's right.
And that's all we get to do is we read about, at our level, about 2,500 pages of testimony a week in either writ applications or cases or something. Not necessarily testimony, I should say 2,500 pages.
Briefs and such,
writs.
Explain, you've been now at the Louisiana Supreme Court level for how long?
Since '91, so about.
This is your second 10-year
yes.
term. And each term for a Supreme Court justice is 10 years. As compared to the terms for the appellate court versus the trial court.
Yeah, well, the appellate courts are also 10 years, but the trial courts are 6.
6. All right, and so you were a Chief Justice for 10 years, excuse me, a Justice.
Right.
And then when you were elected this last go-round, you were the senior member on the Supreme Court, and as a result, you were chosen Chief Justice.
Right. The Constitution provides that the justice with the most service on the court becomes Chief Justice.
And of course, there's rationale behind that because for 10 years you were learning the ropes.
That's right.
And frankly, in our last show, you were discussing all the things that you were doing even though you weren't the Chief Justice, and you were pretty much like the right-hand arm.
Yeah, I had been second in seniority for quite a while. When I got to the court, I think the next youngest justice was 11 years older than I, so they all in time either retired or went to other courts, and it wasn't very long before my baby status when I first went there jumped up to second in line.
So you were not only the first female justice, but the youngest justice at the time.
At the time.
Now we have more than just you as the lone female justice.
Now there's 2 other female justices on the court.
Which obviously reflects more of our population, the demographics. I mean, basically we're 50-50 male and female, but we're still a little bit shy.
Oh yes. And you know, our court really has changed a lot. When I went there, the entire court was Democratic, and now there's Republican justices and Democratic justices. It doesn't really, we don't do things by party lines like Congress does, but you know, sometimes there are different ways to look at the same issue. And I think anytime you have diverse ways of looking at the same issue, it's a good thing.
Well, let's continue this on the next segment. This is Locke Meredith, Legal Lines, and Chief Justice Kitty Kimball. We'll be right back. Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to thank you on behalf of myself, Sean Fagan, and Corey Ogeron, and our entire staff for letting us come into your homes for the last 10 years via Legal Lines. We hope that you've come to a greater understanding of how the law works and how the government works for you. So from all of us, thank you. Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith, and again, very pleased to have on the show today the Chief Justice of the Louisiana Supreme Court, Justice Kitty Kimball. Chief, again, thanks so much for coming in again. You were talking about how, as a Chief Justice and a Justice of the Supreme Court, you're required to interpret the laws, and politics really doesn't play a role. I think in our last show, you did mention, though, that you notice the disposition of the legislature, and that may guide some interpretations at times.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about what's happened since we last met, because you've been through probably one of the most significant personal challenges that a human being goes through. Tell the folks what happened.
Well, I think I'd have to say two significant challenges. The first was becoming Chief Justice, which, I thought as the first female that I most definitely had to do the best job that I could.
Right.
And
interesting.
When I began that job, I really did not learn to say no to anything or anybody. My staff used to tell me all the time, Judge, you have got to be more discriminating. But if somebody asked me to come to talk to them, no matter who it was or where it was, I went, whether it was Shreveport, Monroe, where it was. And I was operating during that time, we figured, between 80 and 100 hours a week.
Holy
That was an
Judge.
average. And I really was doing way, way, way too much. I did not sleep. Maybe, if I got 6 hours of sleep, I thought that was really an awful lot. I usually slept maybe 3-4 hours. I'd get up and work in the middle of the night. There's many a staff member that got emails from me at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. I got up at 4 every morning and started my day. And I just really did not take good care of myself. I was so worried about doing a good job in the job that I let that overtake what I should have been doing for myself. And as a result of that, I found out what happens when you do that. In January 2010, which was a year after I had become Chief Justice, I suffered a major stroke. I was at home in my house, and I got up in the morning to go to the restroom. My husband had planned on going hunting that day, and so he was going to get up really early to go hunting. And when I got up and tried to walk across the floor, I realized that I wasn't able to walk right. I kept leaning and over to the right.
No balance.
I had no balance, and I could not walk. So I sat down on the floor and started screaming for my husband. Thankfully, he had not gone hunting because it was so terribly cold that morning. He decided that he just wasn't going to go, and he was in the kitchen having coffee and heard me screaming help and calling his name. And he came in, and I said, honey, I'm having a stroke. I knew what was happening, and I do not know to this day how I knew that, because I knew nothing about a stroke. My mother had died from a stroke, but it was after heart surgery, and I knew nothing.
So you attributed it to the heart surgery.
Right. And I knew absolutely nothing, but Chief, I knew that I was having a stroke. And I said to him, honey, I am having a stroke.
Did it happen while you were asleep, or it began while you were asleep?
We don't know. The doctors don't know. They are not able to tell whether it happened while I was asleep and then I awoke from it, or whether it happened after I woke up. We just don't know.
Did your symptoms, because you indicate that the initial symptoms were loss of balance, did additional symptoms manifest and show themselves, or was that the sole harbinger indicator?
Now, the month before that, I had a few little days where I was a little bit dizzy. And when I was very young, I had Meniere's disease, which is inner ear problems, and I assumed that's what it was. So I went to the doctor and I told him, I think I'm having inner ear trouble again. I had this, years ago. We went, he referred me to an ENT, and I went in and they checked me and said, no, that you're not having any inner ear troubles. I know now that I did not know then.
Which is what?
That is a symptom of a stroke, but I did not know that.
So the ringing in the inner ear?
No, there was no ringing. It was just a balance thing.
Okay.
You know, I was a little bit dizzy and I'd have a little balance problems.
And is that a typical symptom for anybody having a stroke?
Yes, it is. It is one of the symptoms. There are an awful lot of symptoms. But, you know, I would have never, I mean, first of all, I thought that I was healthy and I knew my family had heart problems, but I had totally not considered stroke because I didn't really know anything about it. And like I say, my mother died from a stroke, but she had just had heart surgery, and they said, you know, that was not an uncommon thing necessarily after surgery of that type. So what I did not know then, and I know now, is that family history is very important. That if you have a family member, like a mother or something like that, that increases your chance of having a stroke, so that I have increased the chances of my children by having a stroke, which is just a horrible thought.
Chief Justice, explain to the folks exactly what a stroke is.
Well, as I appreciate it, there are two kinds, and there's an ischemic stroke, which is the kind I had, which is a result of a blood clot. And then there's the hemorrhagic stroke, which is a bleeding, which is, you know, something pops or something, and, you know, there's bleeding in the brain, which is not what I had. I had the ischemic stroke.
So both of them result in a termination of flow of blood
to the brain.
One is either because of a clot,
right,
preventing the flow of blood in, say, the hose pipe,
right,
versus one where the hose pipe actually bursts and the blood's leaking out and doesn't get to the brain.
Yes, and I know when I went in for all of my tests to see if I had inner ear problems, the doctor sent me to a neurologist who said to me, you know, your left vertebral artery, which is a tiny little artery between the neck and the brain, is totally blocked. He said, but there's nothing to worry about, because what we see many times is that there are two of them, and that the right one has totally taken over that function. And we did the CAT scans and all of those, and he said there's no indication that you've ever had any TIA, which is the little baby strokes that people have from time to time, or anything of that nature, so everything's fine. So he said, I'm going to give you some Lipitor for high cholesterol. I said, well, I don't have high cholesterol. And he said, well, just take this anyway. So I started that about a month before. And of course, I never realized that, you know, probably all along something was telling me something was going to happen, but I just didn't know.
And is that the area where your stroke occurred?
Yes.
So interesting.
It was called, they called it the brain stem, which is right in that area. It was a brain stem stroke.
And so because of the termination of blood flow to that part of the brain, what symptoms manifested themselves either temporarily, well, let's chop it up, temporary versus, at this point, ongoing symptoms?
Well, like I say, the only thing, I knew that I was having a stroke, and like I say, that it is so puzzling to me because I don't know how I knew that, but I said to my husband, I'm having a stroke, and he said, you want me to call 911? I said, yes. So the ambulance was there fairly quickly, and they took me to a hospital in Baton Rouge, not in New Roads, which was such a blessing.
Saved
because
your life,
I found out later that the hospital where they had taken me was only one of about 200 hospitals in the United States that had the ability to do a particular kind of surgery. And they went to my family, because I'm sleeping now. I went to sleep. I got an ambulance, they hooked up the IV, and I'm gone. I'm sleeping.
Let's keep talking about this on the last segment. It's extraordinarily important. This is Locke Meredith, Legal Lines, and the Chief Justice of the Louisiana Supreme Court, Justice Kitty Kimball. We'll be right back. Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to thank you on behalf of myself, Sean Fagan, and Corey Ogeron, and our entire staff for letting us come into your homes for the last 10 years via Legal Lines. We hope that you've come to a greater understanding of how the law works and how the government works for you. So from all of us, thank you. Welcome back to Legal Lines, and again, I'm extremely pleased to have on the show the Chief Justice of the Louisiana Supreme Court, Chief Justice Kitty Kimball. Chief, you're talking about what happened when you were having the stroke and how you were rushed to one of only 200 hospitals in the entire nation that provided this very specific type of care for a stroke victim. Explain to the folks what happened.
Okay, well, like I say, I was sleeping through it all, and so I've learned from my husband later. But when they got me there, my blood pressure, which I'd never had high blood pressure either, which is a very serious problem for possibilities of strokes. You know, people who have high blood pressure really need to pay attention.
So we talked about the increased risk because of family history and now blood pressure.
Blood pressure is a serious risk.
And of course stress and lack of exercise and just pushing it hard like you were.
Yeah. But they told my husband that there really didn't appear to be much they could do, but that they did have, as I was saying, the ability to do this surgery where they go in through the groin with some sort of an instrument with a little claw-looking thing on it, and they remove the clot from the brain. It's
remarkable.
It's absolutely incredible. These doctors are interventional radiologists, which I had never heard of before.
So they're watching it on the TV screen.
Oh yeah, and they were doing it, and they told my husband that that was the only thing that they, you know, could do, and that my chances of surviving that surgery were about 10%.
Wow.
But that without it, there was nothing
You
else
were done
they could
without
do.
it.
So he
Holy
told them
moly.
to do what they could do, and they operated on me, the two interventional radiologists from Baton Rouge, for 4 hours and removed the clot. And then 4 days later, I woke up, which, you know, I mean, I was ready to get up and go back to work, but the doctors, you know, of course, were not ready for me to do that.
Remarkable. So I had no idea that you had a 10% chance of survival, even with the surgery.
That's what.
So without the surgery, you were going to die.
There was a really good chance, you know, that I would not have survived without the surgery, and there wasn't much chance that I was going to survive the surgery.
And in essence, what they were doing was removing the clot so that the blood could flow back to the brain. And what's so remarkable, and we were talking during the segment, that you have not lost any of your cognitive function.
No, I was so very fortunate. Of course, when the doctors told my husband that they were going to remove a tube that they put in for the surgery, my husband said, "You better get some duct tape." And he said, "Duct tape?" And he said, "She may not do anything, but she's going to talk." And so sure enough, when I opened my eye, because I could only open the left, the right eye would not open at all. I had to open it with my hand. And when I opened my eyes, I started talking. You know, and this strange man was standing over me, and he said, "What is your name?" And I said, "Why do you need that information?"
Just like a lawyer.
Oh yeah, my daughter said, "Mama, it's the doctor, tell him your name." So I did, and then they, of course, started asking me who's the president, and the president before that, and, you know, some of those things that you see on television that they traditionally do to find out about your ability to function. And then I had so many doctors, and I went through a 5-hour testing regime with, it was a little later, it wasn't right then when I woke up, but with a neuropsychologist to see what cognitive problems were caused. And I was so very fortunate. I did have some residual problems with my eye and my arm, my right eye and my left arm, but I had no cognitive problems at all, which
is amazing, because you were without blood to the brain.
It absolutely was. And,
it's a miracle,
you know,
really.
and of course that was what gave me the ability to be able to go back to work, because I was ready to go back to work, and, you know, the doctors.
I heard they had to tie you down with some
pretty
horses.
much, you know, you know, he said, "Well, you know, the stress and whatever," and I said, "Doc, you're causing me stress by telling me I can't go back to work."
So the only manifestations really that you have of the stroke now are the physical manifestations of the eye and the left arm?
Well, my balance is still not, you know, as good as it was. I've went through extensive inpatient therapy, and then
months and months of hard work, wasn't it?
Yes, and then outpatient therapy at 2 different facilities. I did outpatient therapy at one facility, and then after I was free from that facility for a while, I started having a little bit of problems with my shoulder. So the doctor said that was not uncommon, and he sent me to a second round of therapy for my shoulder.
And I know that your family has been there, and I can't tell you how many accounts I've heard of your husband Clyde, who's a state representative, just being there for you 24/7 along with your family.
I don't think I could have ever gotten through this without him. He has been everything. I mean, he drives me everywhere. I can't drive. Some things I can't do, like little buttons on a blouse, I can't do. Can't sometimes put my earrings in. He has to put my earrings